So, welcome back to another episode of the Holistic Woman podcast with your guide, Kate Payne. I have Stefanie Poole here with me today from Mumma and Co. Stefanie is a counsellor, a doula, a consultant, and a speaker who combines her many years of experience within the mental health field to bring birthing families innovative, holistic support with a specialised focus on mental and emotional health and well-being. She is the founder of Kindred Clubhouse and Mumma and Co. and lives on the Mornington Peninsula with her husband, her son, and her fur babies. Her vision for women's wellness is a society that values the mental, emotional, and spiritual aspects of birth and parenting, and that we work to prevent many of the maternal mental health issues women experience. She wishes for every birthing person to have access to a hive where they can thrive, a space which offers guidance, empathy, support, hope, and a network that reminds them that they are never alone. Stefanie, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Kate. Thank you so much for having me.
My pleasure. It's so nice to have you here because we've known each other for quite a while and, our paths cross continuously. And I just think that the work that you do in the world is so aligned with the work that I do in the world with women and so needed. And we were talking just before we went live and hit record about the importance of these topics and the importance of conversations like this on a forum like a podcast when we're discussing things that are more in depth and require more time to sit with and more time for contemplation and self-reflection. So it's not something that can be, quickly grabbed from a quick social media post or anything like that, but really requires the woman to be willing to really look at her own experience and be able to reflect and process on that. And so I would love, before we dive into all of the good, rich work that you do with women, I would love for you to begin by sharing the season that you currently find yourself in and those moments where you might be acknowledging or celebrating it.
Yeah, thanks, Kate. I think the season that I'm in, that's a really good question. I think I've definitely been really, I guess, sitting with my energy and really valuing the energetic exchange that I give out into the world. A lot of the work that I do is in pretty much all of it is in mental health, and that requires a lot of listening and my empathetic nature, I guess, to hold that space for people and to allow them to have that time. So over, I guess, this current period, I've realized that I need to really take stock of the energy that I, from doing that, I guess, the energy that I then have left over and how I, look at, what I allow to come into that energy and the things that I want to put my energy actually into. So for me, it's been a season of really evaluating what do I actually want to be doing versus the things that I was doing that maybe aren't as aligned with what I was doing before, and that's okay. So giving permission to let things go, I think that aren't calling me anymore, or that I was doing and not feeling 100% in that, I guess, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. How do you balance your work because it can be really dense at times working with people with mental health conditions who really need that additional nourishment and support. How do you balance that with the needs of not only being a mother, but then your needs as a woman?
I think for me, over the years, I have really learned to express what it is that I need to those around me, and to, I guess, clarify what that means for myself. So I am very open with my family around, listen, I need some time. I mean, this past week, I guess, said that as well, where I was like, my brain has no more capacity to hold any more information. I just need some time for myself. And fortunately, I have a good support at this point in my life where they are able to support me in that. So I make sure that I take that time for myself. It's almost like a non-negotiable at this point in my life and in my career. And it's almost, I need to make sure that I'm doing that, because if I'm asking others to care for themselves, to self-care, I need to be doing those things that I've then, I guess, encouraged people to do as well.
Yeah, that embodied experience is
Mm.
so important, that we must be willing to practice what we're teaching and what we're sharing and what we're asking others to do. I wonder if you can share how you got into this work, and was it from your own personal experience that drew you into working with pregnant women in through the birth portal, postpartum? I know you've done doula work, and then working with mothers specifically with where you're at now. What was that journey like for you?
Yeah, so it's been a long journey, I guess, and it goes probably even further back with my dad. So my dad had alcohol dependence. He was addicted to alcohol, and that had a huge impact on me growing up in a family where there was addiction. So from a young age, I guess I had this desire to want to help and to realize that there was a struggle underneath that. There was a reason why my dad was drinking. Um, as I kind of got older and I went into working in psychology and going to school in America, I studied there. And really wanted to be able to help people. I then started to work in addiction and mental health, and just felt that I wanted to really understand why people felt those ways, instead of just, judging people based on the fact that they have mental health issues or concerns or addiction, because it comes from somewhere. So from there, I'd worked in mental health for a majority of my career, both in the US and then here in Australia. And then when I had my son, which is now 7 years ago, I I guess it took me on a different journey, still mental health related, but I found that I then struggled with postpartum depression, anxiety, and I was diagnosed with obsessive compulsive disorder after he was born. And that was a really, I guess, eye-opening experience, because I don't think it was that I never thought I would experience that, but I guess because I work in that field, I had the information, but I definitely was caught off guard in the sense that I had felt prepared. I didn't really know what was normal, in the sense, whatever normal means, but that what was, I guess normal in the sense of emotions and things to be feeling after I had a child. And I definitely underestimated being so far away from my family, not necessarily preparing for a network that I probably needed. At that time. I had support, but having the right support, I guess, like, and expressing what it is that you need. So from there, I realized when I tried to reach out for help how difficult it was. And I felt really prepared to navigate that system, given that I had worked in it. And I was, to be honest, I was really disappointed. I was frustrated that, if I was having trouble navigating this, what are other people doing who maybe aren't as, resourced in the areas of mental health, or speaking out for themselves, or being able to articulate what it is that they need. And then, yeah, I just got frustrated and realized we need to do something more about this. So that's when I started Mumma Bees and Co., which really was designed as a hive, again, for birthing people to thrive, trying to build that network of support that I felt I did not have in terms of other peers, like other birthing people and women and parents who are going through something similar, and normalizing some of that instead of pathologizing it into, it's mental illness. And also, like, how did it get to that point? Like, why was I struggled for a year before I actually reached out and realized that it was maybe something that I needed support with, more than I could handle at the time. But when I look back, I think, why did I not feel like I could, I guess, deal with that sooner? Like, what were the barriers in the way? And so that's, I guess, what led me to then study to be a doula and really want to help in that aspect, and bring my skills, once I felt better myself, bring my skills and my passion, I guess, into that to help families.
I think it's so true about navigating the system. My experience was so similar after the birth of my first child. Um, and I think that, you know, the barriers to access, I think, were a big issue for me, in the sense that when I reached out for the support through the system, oftentimes the system was so overwhelmed and overrun that there wasn't space for me, and so there wouldn't have been space for other women in similar circumstances. And so I think after I reached out a few different times and tried to access a number of different services where there was just extensive wait lists and things like that, I think I just kind of got on with it. And I think there's a lot of women who probably do the same. So as I hear you speaking about, for someone like you who already knows how to navigate the system and knows how to reach out for the support, and feeling like there's the barriers to access there, and what do women who don't understand the system do? I think that's what they do. They just kind of get on with it. And I'm sure you've seen that through your work with Mumma Bees and Co, of women who years down the line are still having their lives impacted by what happened to them during birth or pregnancy or in those early postpartum phases. Do you find that with the women that you work with?
Absolutely. I think, a lot of the work that I do, once people find that is what I do, is around birth trauma. And unfortunately, people come to me. I mean, I'm glad they find that support. But, again, I think that a lot of people, once they reach me at that point, and again, this doesn't have to be 6 weeks after the baby's born. I have people who contact me years after their baby is born who are still, I guess, reliving that in certain ways, have a lot of emotions and feelings around that, their birth, and a loss and a guilt and different feelings and emotions that come up for them. And they really want to make sense of that. Maybe they're actually pregnant again, and they're looking to kind of explore the first birth before they then, birth again. So it is an area that I guess I definitely see quite frequently, is people not feeling that they have the space to share that. And we have mothers groups. I'm not saying there aren't supports out there. There are, but it's not for everyone. And I don't always think that that is the place that people feel maybe safe enough to share that. I mean, they're not set up in a way that it's really about the birthing person, in my opinion. I mean, from what I experience, a lot of it is the baby, how can the feeding, the food, what are we feeding them? And a lot of it is geared towards, 6 months later, I mean, we're struggling now. I remember sitting in my mother's groups and I was like, I am so depressed right now. Like, I can't think about, what I'm feeding solids in 4 months. I'm trying to survive. Like,
Yes.
and so I think sometimes it's just not realistic to where we're at that time. Like, we're not thinking about, and we're not asking, where someone is at that present time. It's like these things are just set up to think that everybody just goes through the same kind of process, when that's not true, and yeah, I just think that, I do think that there is that missing piece, that there aren't, people are just kind of getting on with it, like you said, or they're walking around with these feelings, and thinking maybe perhaps they are depressed or they have anxiety, and maybe they do, but is that normal? Should I be feeling this way? And all these questions, that where are you getting those answers? Is it from friends? Is it family? Is it Google? I mean, the amount of people that Google things that I've worked with, where I've had to say, please stop Googling it. Like, the first thing is to stop Googling, because you'll find an answer for whatever it is that you're looking for. So I think it's then trusting ourselves. Like, it really is trying to, like, push that all away, which is so hard, and really sit with, what do I want? Like, what do I feel? And what do I want from my family? Not what the book says, not what, the maternal health center says, or what, and that, like I said, that stuff is helpful, but then it's like, what do you want to do? So yeah, I think that was a piece where I struggled with, where I was listening to all these different things, and I was like, but what do I feel,
Yeah. Yeah.
so
I
yeah.
think there's a a gaping hole actually in the system of support for women to support women to reorientate themselves back into what are their core values, what are their core
Mm,
beliefs, and what do they desire this to look and feel like for them as they move through that process. I think it stems all the way back, of course, to even fertility for many women, where, you know, when growing up, and certainly in my instance, growing up and moving into sort of fertility years, I suppose in my 20s and early 30s was, you know, there was just this expectation of like, oh well, like I just fall pregnant straight away, right? Like, isn't that how it works? You have sexual intercourse with someone and then you fall pregnant, right? Not really understanding the ins and outs of how the menstrual cycle works, and how, you know, you need to be ovulating, you need to have healthy ovulation and all of those things, and that small fertile window, and all of these pieces that then carries through into what pregnancy looks like you say. It's like this textbook, you know, women move through 9 months of pregnancy and it looks like this, and then we'd have birth and it looks like this, and then we do postpartum and it looks like this. And I think that it's a real challenge of beliefs and conditioning when our experience is very different to that. I
mm,
think, and then I think for many women, they don't have the tools to be able to reorientate themselves back to, okay, this is my experience. It doesn't look like what, you know, the medical profession or this system or that system is saying it should look like, but how do I want it to look and how do I want it to feel? And so I wonder if you can speak about in your work how you support women to reorientate themselves back to that. How do I want it to look? How do I want it to feel? What do I want my experience to bring me?
mm. I think it really is. It's such a. It's difficult, to be honest,
Mm,
because there's so many. The more that I do this work, and I guess when you really listen to what mothers are saying, there's so many layers to it, and it starts with like our own childhoods, our own births, probably, in our childhoods,
probably. Mm,
our I think some of the common themes that come up is the guilt, like a lot of guilt,
mm,
and feeling as though we're somehow just pushed to the side, and
mm,
getting. I guess a lot of the work I do is empowering, like building back
mm,
up that confidence, empowering women, and together, like working collaboratively. Again, not
mm,
me telling them this is what you do and we're doing it together,
mm,
but really stripping it back to, and you said it before, what are your values? Like, what do
mm,
you want to feel? And a lot of times I actually use, I have a set of cards that has pictures. I feel like a
mhm,
lot of times we don't always have the words to articulate what it is that we actually are looking for, but we might identify with a picture or the sun or
mm,
a feeling that we want to feel. And then it's
mhm,
kind of almost working backwards into, okay, well, if you want to, feel that the rays of sun on your skin, or you want to feel joy or whatever it is that elicits
mm,
for you, how do you start to work backwards and incorporate that into your life right now, even in the
mm,
smallest moments, so, and I find that, like, those questions, as much as it seems easy, like off
yeah.
the bat when we're talking, it's really hard for people to sometimes, even it's like, well, I don't know what photo or picture, or I don't know what words come up for me anymore. Like we've somehow
Mm,
lost ourselves
yeah.
within that mothering. And so a lot of the work is just trying to come back to, like, who am I? Who am I?
Mm,
Who was I before? Who am I now? Who am I as a mother? And who do I
mm,
want to be? I mean, and who society tells us maybe we should be. So it's
mm,
really an intricate process, almost like a web, I feel like sometimes, where sometimes you think you're starting at one part of the web, the
mm,
weaving of it, and then you end up in another side where it's like, oh my gosh, I didn't even know this is what I wanted. So
yeah.
it's a lot of uncovering, and I think that people have to, like you said, that you have to be willing to spend that time. I think we sometimes expect things to be fixed, like, or to
Mm,
be fixed, first of all, but to have a short period of time to fix it. I mean,
Mm,
sometimes I'll have people say how many sessions, and I'm like, I can't predict
mm,
that. I mean, I can give you an average of maybe what would work, but it is a process to
mm,
come back and really look at, who you are now, in
mm,
this phase of your journey and your life. So yeah,
mm. And trauma is like that. Like, as we both know,
it
trauma,
is.
there is nothing linear about healing
No.
trauma or grieving the circumstances around that
Hmm.
event or experience. My sense is that when we think about fertility, pregnancy, birth, and postpartum as we classify it, knowing of course that we're postpartum forever if you've carried a child, whether you've
Hmm.
birthed that child or not is also still postpartum. That those moments, those transitions, those seasons, as I call them, they are fleeting when you consider the lifespan of a woman. And yet they have such profound impact on every single facet of our lives after that experience. Do
Hmm.
you find in the women that you work with, so if you work with a woman in the pregnancy stage and you're able to support her with postpartum planning and birth planning, and of course that doesn't negate that there may be trauma experienced, but do you find that it equips women with more tools and resources, so the likelihood then of them not being able to process that trauma post event is lessened?
Absolutely. I
Mm.
definitely think that that is true. I mean,
Yeah.
I wish that more people
Mm.
came even before they're pregnant. So like,
Mm.
in the preconception, like just thinking about, oh, maybe we're going to try.
Yeah.
I wish that people took, I guess, the mental, emotional, and spiritual side of that um, into consideration. I mean, some people do, but more people
Mm.
before they even get pregnant. Because, yes, from what I've seen, the sooner that you kind of, I guess, look at these different areas and can equip yourself with some of the, like you said, tools or skills
Mm.
or understanding and awareness, the better off sometimes it will be. I mean, it's just,
Mm.
when I get people who are kind of postpartum, that's not to say, I mean, clearly we can do a lot of work with that, but
Sure.
it is a bit harder in the sense that, those things may have already occurred, and who's to say that they, like you said, I mean, we don't know what would have happened, but I think
Mm.
from what I've seen, the empowerment, again, the confidence of
Mm.
knowing, and the acceptance of not so much like the end result. It's like, yes, it could still not be the way that they wanted or that
Mm.
they envisioned or that their birth plan said it should be, but
Mm.
there is this understanding that it's like, I did what I could. I was prepared. I have the knowledge, and
Mm.
I have the resources after if something actually occurs, that I know where I can go, and
Mm.
I feel like I can say that I need help. So I
Yeah.
think I wish that this was a bit more discussed, like throughout the journey, and not just waiting until after, or until someone is in a crisis, or
Mm.
they're diagnosed with a mental illness,
Mm.
where for some people, I mean, I think that's what I've realized too. I've worked in a clinical settings. I've seen mental illness, like I've seen that
Mm.
side of it, that spectrum, that end of the spectrum. And I just sometimes wonder, I look at like women who are saying, I have postpartum depression, I'm anxious, I'm this and I'm that.
Mm.
And I'm like, why is this happening at the rate that it is,
Yeah.
and could some of it be prevented if we
Mm.
started sooner, or we had the skills and the tools and we were assessing sooner? I mean,
Mm.
there is the Edinburgh postnatal depression um, scale and score that I mean, people should be using to
Mm.
assess whether someone maybe has postpartum depression, but unfortunately it's not always used consistently, it's not always
Mm.
followed up as often. And it's only a snapshot of where someone's at in that moment. It doesn't mean that 6 months or 3 months from then that all of a sudden they're still not depressed, you know? So
Yes.
I think that, yeah, it's really tricky because I don't think it's something that we're really hear as much about, like while we're pregnant or, you know, before we're even pregnant.
Yeah, it's true. And there's a lot of normalization, as there is in so many aspects of women's health, but there's a lot of normalization in particular around those early postpartum days. There's probably quite a, I know I saw you did a post on this on Instagram. There's quite a difference between the baby blues and postpartum depression, but also there's a lot of similarities as well. And so, you know, one can be sometimes the catalyst for the next. And I think it's that there's not enough, you know, there's not enough education, resources, access to support for mental wellness. And you've spoken about this. I saw you post speaking that mental wellness is so much more than the absence of illness. And that you've just mentioned that oftentimes, you know, the system really works in a reactive way. So when, you know, it comes in when women find themselves in that state of crisis. But all of that preventative opportunity is kind of lost.
Yeah.
I wonder, can you speak to that a little bit?
I think that it's hard because when we look at, for example, you're right. I mean, if someone wants to access a psychologist, the wait times can be significantly long. I don't think that everybody necessarily needs a psychologist. That's just my opinion. There are so many other options that we're not told about. If you go traditionally to your GP and you go that route, that's totally fine. And the GP is the first point of call for a lot of these things. But, you know, a lot of times you'll get a mental health plan, you'll see a psychologist, that's just the way it's done. But there's so many more options. And I think that the system itself, you know, and especially like funding and all of these other things, they focus on the hospitalization, the beds, the crisis, all of that. It's not going to preventative. Not as much of it is going to preventative kind of models that really try to look at why is this happening in the first place and what are we doing in the systems to probably contribute to a lot of this, which many of us know, you know, after we've birthed, it's not always the way that we planned it would be. So I think that I think then it's like we need, in my opinion, I mean, and that's why I started Mumma Bees, like we need to take this into our own hands sometimes. Like we have the power as a community to really make changes. You know, I think sometimes we rely on like the government or other people to kind of change the things for us. But, you know, I think in the system, like we just don't always have the access. So I feel that mental health should be accessible. And, you know, unfortunately, there are costs to some of these things. But for example, with Mumma Bees, I was trying to use a peer model. And this also came from my experience in founding and running Kindred Clubhouse, which is in Hastings in Victoria here. And it's run off a peer model. And to see how, as a community, people come together and they share their stories. They're using their lived experience or living experience of mental health issues or challenges or grief. And there are no psychologists, like there are no like clinical supports there. And it's just so amazing to see how the power of like people who can have that understanding where it's not just necessarily, you know, go to the hospital or go to a psychologist. There's a community there for you. And I guess what I saw there was what gave me sometimes the idea of Mumma Bees, because it was like, well, it's almost magical. Like I just can't describe it. It's like just people feeling that they have others who are there for them. And a lot of people then may not need to go on to a hospitalization or a psychologist or a counselor. That may be enough to have that support of other people who understand them. And so I think when we think of this whole mental wellness or mental illness, you know, and I've spoken about this before, it's a spectrum, and it's not just the illness, and people that have mental illness can still thrive with mental illness.
Yeah.
Or just because you're mentally well or you think you are, that doesn't mean that that stays like that forever. You know, we are
Yes.
constantly changing, and I guess our circumstances, our environments, any of those things can throw us off. And I think we saw that through
Mm.
COVID. I mean,
Mm.
just so many people struggling in different ways that may not have ever
Mm.
thought that it would impact them in that way.
Mm. Yeah.
So I just think it's important to have those options for people. And I know that not everybody knows what those options are. So
Yeah. Yeah. There's a few
yeah.
different directions I'd love to go here. You mentioned COVID.
Hmm.
How did your work have to shape shift to support women during COVID? Because as we know, in many areas here in Australia, women were birthing solo without partners, without
Hmm.
support. Access into hospitals was obviously heavily, and I think even now in some areas is still quite restricted. How
Hmm.
did that impact women's experience with the women that you were working with?
Yeah, I think, I mean, I wasn't doing as much of the doula work then, but definitely having doulas in with birthing families was
Mm,
extremely difficult, if not even able to do it,
possible.
not even possible unless you had exemptions, and even that was
Mm,
difficult.
mm,
Um, Counseling wise, I definitely got a lot of people who, again, birth trauma, but
mm,
trauma.
mm,
So just experiences that were, I guess, the challenges again of feeling alone, of not
mm,
having a partner in there, and not having anyone that was familiar to them, and
mhm.
almost just things that I've never, we'd never think would actually happen in this,
Yeah.
in our lifetime, probably. Um,
Mm,
but I guess the repercussions of what that actually meant, the birthing experience, like, yeah, you don't get that same experience again. You may birth
mm,
again, but you don't get that same birth, I guess.
mm,
So to think that people were coming out of that without having anyone there that felt familiar was really
mm,
hard, I think, to even hear at times, because,
mm.
and then not having a great birth experience on top of that, like not having a great birth.
Yeah.
Um, for various reasons. Obviously, if you're not feeling safe in the beginning of when you're birthing,
Mm,
and I think just the stress on the system, the midwives and they're
mm,
trying the best that they can in those circumstances, and just that kind of almost vicarious trauma that carries over because they are probably traumatized in certain ways of like what's happening, and having to like wear, like what's the word I'm looking for, like put on their like masks, and
yeah.
birthing in a mask, things that we would never think that would even
Yeah.
be happening were happening.
Yeah.
So it
Hmm.
definitely added another level of I think traumatic experiences for people.
Yeah. And I imagine that your work then with birth debriefing becomes
Yes.
so critical in those
Yeah.
moments. I mean, it's so important. It's kind of when I think about your work with birth debriefing, I think about it in the same way as I think about, a pelvic health check with a physio 6 weeks after your, which also is not standardized care, right?
No. Hmm.
So, I would love to see some of these things become standardized care. So, a 6 week checkup with a women's health, pelvic floor specialist who can actually do a proper assessment of your overall, health and wellness post birth, and then to have someone like you and other women in the community doing similar work where you're able to process whether it was good or bad or somewhere in between,
Hmm.
just to have that space for reflection and to be witnessed and to be heard and to be seen in your experience becomes so important. Can you speak more to this process of birth, processing and debriefing? Because it's probably not something that, a lot of women even know exists.
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't even think I knew it existed until
Yeah.
I had to look for someone to debrief with. And there really wasn't anyone, to be honest, as you
Mm,
said. I mean, the hospital can offer a short debrief.
mm-hmm.
I don't necessarily think that's enough for everyone, perhaps. And it's maybe not done in a way that is maybe what people's expectations are.
Mm.
So I think that, and you mentioned a really good point. It doesn't have to be that you've had like a traumatic or a not so great kind of experience. It could be your experience with something that you really want to share because it was amazing.
Yeah.
And you know, so I think that it doesn't have to mean that it went maybe not the way that you planned. So
Mm.
anyone should be able to have that opportunity if they choose
Mm.
to debrief their birth with somebody,
Mhm.
or in a space that they feel comfortable with. And you're right. I mean, I think that it's very different a debrief. So when we say debrief, like I think, or a birth story sharing, I guess I've been
Mm.
that too, because I think the debrief tended to just feel it was a little bit too kind of clinical, or
Mm.
the connotation around it.
Yeah,
But I
like there'll be
think,
a list of Q&As for you to
yeah,
answer. Yeah.
exactly. Um, but I think that it's different than, you know, sometimes we may share our birth story in passing with someone, or it's
Mm.
like, oh, how did it go? And you're kind of like, oh, it wasn't so great.
Mm.
That's not what we're talking about. Like, we're talking about a specific space, that is set in an intention of, having that space be a safe space that you can share anything that you
Mm.
want. And I do it in a guided way, and
Mm.
incorporate different aspects of, you know, some questions and
Mhm.
meditations, and really dropping
Mm.
into our bodies to feel what it is
Mhm.
that we want to feel, and to recreate maybe a meaning, if there is one, or just something
Mm.
that you want to take forward from that.
Mhm.
And usually those can be, one-off sessions. Like, some people are, it's enough for them to have maybe 2 hours. I usually allow for 2 hours because there's a lot of
Mhm.
stuff that comes up in that. But a lot of
Mhm.
times I've even done after that a few other sessions, because there's been things that people may not have processed before or thought about,
Mm.
or they have the birth debrief. And then I always say, you can check in with me, because things come up for them
Mm.
outside of that time.
Mhm.
So I think it is a really important thing, as you said, to, I wish that, yeah, that was
Mm.
available as a kind of like something that anyone can do. And we said before, it doesn't have to be that, you know, you've missed the boat, kind of, in a sense that I haven't done a
Mm.
birth debrief. It's been, I mean, like, my son is 7, and, you know, I have not that long ago, like, debriefed it as well. And you can do it multiple times, because what we
Yeah.
remember in the beginning is sometimes different from what we feel, as time goes on.
Mm.
Sometimes some people come a little too, not too soon, but if it's a little bit too, early in the process, I will
Mhm.
talk to people about, is this the right time? And maybe we wait. So there are times when
Mhm.
sometimes we need to give it a little more space for people to
Mhm.
kind of, I guess, settle in, and
Mm.
really, then come back and try to process some of that, depending on what it is that they want to work on. So
Yeah. Yeah, I think you can, there's, you can be processing aspects of the birth that you had for decades. Like
definitely,
you say,
yeah.
little pieces still, there's still aspects of my first birth that I'm still processing, because it was so complex and it was so layered. And as
Hmm.
you were speaking as well, it also made me think about the importance of not only having access to someone to speak to in this capacity, but also someone who you feel energetically aligned with. And
Yeah.
I think that can sometimes be the barrier of entry for people when they don't feel like they're, yes, maybe they have access to something through a community health center, or maybe through the hospital, they've been allocated someone to speak to. But if that woman's not energetically aligned with that person, if they don't feel safe in that space for whatever reason, I'm not talking about the superficial safety level of, not feeling literally safe, but just not feeling held, not feeling like there's a container there that's a safe space for you to share. I think that's a really important, aspect to consider as well. And I think that's why it's so important that we have, as many people in the community offering this type of work as possible. So then the choice for women to find someone, it's the same with any mental health
Hmm.
practitioner, whether it's a psychologist or a counselor, any practitioner actually across any modality. If you don't feel like they're holding the container that you desire, then it's a no, right?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Like, and I say this all the time, you know, because like going back to the psychologist, and I think, if you go to your GP and you get a mental health plan, a lot of
Mm.
times, sometimes the psychologist is even chosen by the GP if it's someone that
Yes,
they've worked with, and that's fine.
often.
Maybe I'm not, like you said, that doesn't mean that they're not a good fit for someone, but
Mm.
it may not be for you. So
Mm.
I always say, go online. Like, you have access to the APS, which is the Australian Psychological Society. You can choose who you
Mm-hmm.
actually want to see, and you can go
Mm-hmm.
to your GP and say, listen, I want to see this particular person. So
Mm.
it's you're right. Not everyone's going to have access to spend money on certain things, and maybe they do need to see a specific person. But
Mm.
just keeping that in mind, you're right. I mean, if you do have options,
Mm.
don't give up. Like, I think I hear that a lot. It's like, well, that counselor didn't work and that psychologist didn't work, so I'm done. Like, I'm not doing it
Mm.
anymore. And like you said, it's a relation. It's a rapport. It's a relationship.
Mm.
It's an alignment. You have to feel comfortable with this person,
Mm.
and we don't always have that off the bat from
Mm.
trying with just one person. So sometimes you
Yeah.
do need to give it a few goes before
Mm.
you find someone that fits for you. And yeah, that's just part of it, I guess.
Yeah.
You want to make sure
Yeah.
that um you're feeling aligned to that person, like you said.
Yeah. And having the tools for women to feel resourced enough that they can have the resilience to stay the course, right? To get the support that they require, whatever that might look like, because I think it can be exhausting.
Yeah.
And oftentimes it's easier to give up and just get on with it because it's just so tiring. And once you've seen, a number of people and haven't really felt aligned, and then maybe you start to question, like, is it a good fit? Is this what I need? I think that's those opportunities then for women for women who have the tools to be able to come back inwardly and be like, okay, what do I need? Do
Hmm.
these needs still feel relevant? And if yes, do I have the staying power and the willingness to keep going to actually find the right person for me? Because there is no doubt in my mind, there is someone that is able to support everyone. We just have to
Yeah.
find that person.
Yeah.
um, I wonder if you can speak to, you mentioned the Kindred Clubhouse, you
Hmm.
mentioned it being this community of support. I know it's a localized initiative and it's also for men and women, but I
Hmm.
just want to speak about the energy around the concept of this community. You alluded to it, you spoke a little bit about it, but I'd love to expand on that conversation about having hubs like this
Hmm.
scattered around for women, say, to be able to access, where they basically have access, as you say, to a community of support that basically is just reminding them that they are worthy, that they are enough, that they are valid in their experience, that there is support available to them. And this is a safe space for them to come and share and be in connection. And connection was the piece the word that you used a couple of times. And that really seems like it's the pinning value of why it's so important. Can you speak about how the Kindred Clubhouse came to be and speak a bit more about that model?
Yeah. So the model itself is from America. So it was
Okay.
from the 1960s. It's a model that started when there was a group of, I guess, patients at that time who were hospitalized, and who eventually, when people were, I guess, sent back out kind of into the community, deinstitutionalization, which are these words now just seem ridiculous,
Mm.
but that was at that time. And then they were sent out kind of with no supports from a hospital setting that they've been living in for a very long time. So the
Mm.
group came together. This was not professionals. These were not people who had studied, like, these were people who had lived the experiences, came together and said, we want to do something on our own, like, for ourselves. Like, what are we going to
Mm.
do? And from there grew this idea of a clubhouse, which the model itself is really for people with mental health issues. But I mean,
Mm-hmm.
again, you can relate this to anything, really.
Mm.
And that's what I love about it. And it grew. It was a place where people could come. They kind of get back into society in a sense, where it's
Mm.
I guess, helping people get back to work. It's like a home where you start and you learn skills. you practice skills,
Mm.
learn together. So for example, from mothers, you would come and you learn how to breastfeed together, or you
Yeah.
learn how to, I don't know, whatever it is, like you would do it
Yeah.
together, and
Mm.
you feel validated. You're right. It's like
Mm.
you feel like people understand where you're coming from. You know, you're having a crap day and it's like, listen, this just is horrible. Like how am I going to go
Mm.
on? It's like, listen, I've been there. I was just there the other day. Like I felt like that.
Mm.
It's like, all right, I'm not alone.
Mm.
It just breaks down this whole barrier that we're living in. We're living by ourselves. Like we're in it on our
Mm.
own, and there's nobody else that can possibly understand.
Mm.
When you bring people together, the transformations that I've seen in that place is, I honestly, I really can't explain it. It's like
Mm.
I said, it's almost magical because I am there and I can offer, you know, some guidance and support, but I don't even need to do anything. Like
Mm.
it's people just making friendships, like people who are feeling isolated, people who maybe just were lonely and again grieving. We've had a lot of people who've had losses come down and they just need to
Mm.
regroup and find, who are my people again, what do I
Yeah.
like to do,
Mm-hmm.
you know. And you're right, if you could relate that, I mean, if some of these things could happen as a hub for mothers,
Yeah.
there's so much that could work, you know. So
Mm.
I mean, I would love for these clubhouses to be around in more space. Victoria, this is the only one.
Wow. Is it
Queensland,
really?
yeah. So Queensland has about 3 at the moment. So
Yep.
there's about 10 in Australia and about 300
Wow.
plus all over the world. So the
Wow.
model itself I knew, but I guess I got frustrated when I was working in the clinical side of things
Mm.
with just like where were people going and how were they connecting and
Mm.
communicating with others and learning and practicing skills that they might have been, you know, taught in the hospital or other places, and then
Mm.
you're just sent home by yourself, which is what we do with parents and mothers.
Yeah.
Like send them home alone,
Yeah.
by themselves to kind of figure it out on your own. And that's just, I don't even think that that's realistic. We need each other. We need
Mm.
each
Mm.
other. And from what I've seen, when people get together and they really care about one another,
Mm.
it, a lot of times the clinical interventions, they're not even needed as much as
Mm.
they were. We've had people who were hospitalized 6 times in like 3 months who haven't even been hospitalized since they've come there. And I
Wow.
think that just really, it just shows the power of connection and
Mm.
feeling validated and feeling seen and heard, and that
Mm-hmm.
they are simple things that we just probably don't realize are so powerful,
Yeah.
in the work that we,
Yeah.
you know, in the work that we even do ourselves too.
Yeah.
Um, that's what people need. That's what they want. And when I think back to when I was struggling the most, I just wanted someone to sit there with me and just hold the space. And I didn't want it fixed. I didn't want
Mm.
anything else from that person. I just wanted someone to sit with me in my vulnerability
Mm.
and just be there and maybe say, you know what, I've been there too, you know.
Yeah.
And that probably would have been enough in that moment, but
Yeah.
I didn't have that. And so I guess that's why with Mama Bees, that's what I would want people to feel,
Mm.
that there was a place they could have those things. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I guess I was trying to take what I do at the Clubhouse into the community with mothers and parents,
Yep.
but it's a hard concept to grasp.
Yeah.
And it's not a nonprofit. So Kindred Clubhouse is a nonprofit,
Mm.
but I think the general community, the peer stuff isn't quite there in terms of like, you know, people realizing kind of the impact and the importance of
Mm.
women supporting women and being together, and that we can do a lot of it ourselves, you know.
Yeah.
um so yeah, that was a long
Yeah.
answer to that question.
It's such an amazing conversation to be having, and such an amazing initiative, and kudos to you for bringing that into that community, because mothers who are struggling with their mental wellness, they are still
Right.
able to access that
Absolutely,
club, right?
absolutely.
It's
So when
not
we say, I
specific.
mean, there's
Yeah,
mothers there. There's a
exactly.
lot of mothers there.
Yeah.
But no, it's not specifically just,
Yes.
you know, mothers and women, or
Yes.
those that identify it. You know, it's everyone. So
Yes.
it's a little
Yes.
bit different. But I think,
Yeah.
yeah, if anyone's listening, I mean, I think Kindred, and they're in Victoria or Hastings area, the
Yeah.
peninsula,
Yeah.
it is an option, and it's something that I
Yeah.
think can really benefit people if they're willing to give it a go.
Yeah, I will definitely link to that in the show notes because I think it's such an amazing, program and space for connection. And connection is so potent and so powerful. And we're only
Absolutely.
now just starting to really grasp from the science and the research just how important that connection is for people to feel healthy and safe and supported and thrive, as you
Mhm.
as you so beautifully put it with mothers. Well, I'm conscious of your time and the time of our listeners. It's been such a beautiful conversation. I'm sure there will be many, many more to come. Thank you for being here and sharing all of your wisdom with us.
Thank you for having me. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Where can people come to find you? You've mentioned a couple of places, but do you want to drop the links here and let people know how they
Sure.
can connect?
Yeah, so there are a few links, I guess, but you can definitely, the website is www.mummabeesandco.com.
Mhm.
And then on Instagram, it's at mummabeesandco. And for Kindred Clubhouse, it's at _Kindred_Clubhouse. I should know it, but
There's so many,
oh my
that's
gosh,
why.
there's so many.
So many ways for support.
Yeah, but yeah, if you even go to the Mumma Bees website, a lot of the stuff is on there, so you'll definitely find everything there. Yeah.
Amazing. I'll pop everything in the show notes as well so people can just click the link and it can take them right there.
Thank you.
All right.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Kate.
Steph.